I think everybody's gotten comments in to Stacy. Okay, Lynn, for Stacy.
Yeah, I've tried to get a comment on these minutes, and it hasn't quite gone through yet. On the bottom of page 4, it has to do with Tri-Town, the operating budget, and whether Tri-Town is making money or is not making money, is breaking even. And my concern is having it memorialized in the minutes of these meetings what's actually happening. And when I brought it up at the meeting on the 3rd of December, when I was actually sitting at the table when Mr. Eagles was out of the country, there seemed to be others in agreement around the table that Tri-Town is not currently breaking even or certainly not making money, in part because it's not being maintained. And so my preference would be to have the language clearer in this, so that instead of saying in which it is breaking even, having it clarified that it either is not breaking even or making it understood, so that we're not memorializing a lack of clarity or an untruth. So that's one place. And perhaps there are those here who know what the right answer is.
Well, maybe I can interrupt. I'll turn it to Mr. Kelly, since you're one of the managers of Tri-Town.
Sure.
What's the best term?
I think you could say it's breaking even, but it cannot support the upgrade or the maintenance of the plant or capital. It can only break even with respect to its operating expenses. So to suggest that it's not, I think the comment Lynn made, the fact that it isn't being maintained is because it does not have the funding to address the maintenance needs. That's not the reason it's not breaking even. It's not breaking even because the operating revenue comes in with very little over and above that, generates a small amount of cash, but not enough to sustain the plant.
Okay, so it's breaking even on an operating basis, but not enough funds to support maintenance and capital improvements.
Correct.
Okay.
Would you like a motion on that amendment?
Yes, may I, Mr. McGrath?
So moved.
A motion on the amendment to the minutes. Do I have a second? A second. Discussion. All those in favor of that? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay, that changed. Lynn?
On page 5, second bullet point from the bottom, it's a cautionary note about verb choices, perhaps. We talked at the time about if people could or would not pump if the fee increases. And I think the point is people might not pump. It's not that they would not pump or could not pump. It's that if a fee increases, people might choose to delay pumping. But the way the language says, if the pumping fee increased, people could not pump when they need to, which could cause systems to fail. Because I don't think that's it. I think people, the point would be that people might delay, which would cause the failure, or could cause a failure, but it's not that they could not pump, it's that they might choose inappropriately to delay.
So this is what was said at the meeting, and this is a record of what was said, and it says bullets represent comments and questions of panel or audience members, do not reflect the view of the group as a whole, and the consultant responses are in italics. So this is the consultant response. If you disagree with the consultant's response, you know, that can come up maybe in another time. I'm not really sure how we should.
The concern I have is that we're memorializing something
change
that's
that. We can say, we can make a clause in there that says.
Let's put it in the minutes of this meeting that comment was made, and that
I have concerns about memorializing something like this that then becomes a public document, and somebody reads this and somebody believes this to be fact.
Right. So I just want to, I want to acknowledge that, and I've heard that from a number of people about these summaries in general. So I think we have to be really clear that these summaries, everything in this summary is not fact. Lots of people put their opinions in the comments. That's why we added this clause about bullets represent comments and questions of the panel. I could clarify that clause even more, that say this does not constitute fact or something, right? But the fact is, if we try to fact check everybody's bullet points and everybody's comments, what we won't have is, we will not have a reflection of the conversation of the meeting. We'll have some kind of, document of truth or fact, only to the extent everybody agrees that it's truth or fact. So I just want to be clear, there's limits to how much we can tweak the meeting summaries to make sure everybody thinks everything everybody said here is true.
May I suggest just a footnote, that comment of the meeting with the correction in the summaries. To footnote that this is fact, even though whoever's made a comment maybe kind of got it, twisted a little bit, rather than changing the comments that are in there.
Right, so.
Footnote the minutes.
But is it, I mean, is it
Footnote the
true?
minutes.
Correct.
Would everybody say that it's not true, that if the pumping fee increased, people could not pump when they need to? Because it was said.
It's,
They may not. So.
may not.
May not.
I was just going to say, and I certainly can't remember exactly what words were used, but I'm wondering if this is just a word issue, if that first could should be might. If that didn't
Exactly.
reflect the statement. If the pumping fee increased,
Yeah.
people might not pump when they need to, which could cause systems to fail.
Okay.
I think that would be, would
Is that
you like to
okay
make
with
that
that?
motion?
I don't, I'd be happy to make that.
Do we have a motion to change the word to might? Do we have a second? Second. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained? Okay, great, thank you. Are there any other comments? Then may I have a motion to accept the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstained? Thank you.
All right.
And again, comments for the December 17th meeting, I guess should be sent your way.
We should.
So all please take a look at the draft and send any kind of suggested changes to Stacy, so at the next meeting we can be approving those.
Yeah, and in particular, I think it would be good for you all, for the December 17th, I've already gotten some comments, but in particular, really, please look at the executive summary. So there was a request that we, in particular, tried to get that right, such that you all could use it to update your constituents. You could put it in your organizational newsletters and things like that, as really a summary of what happened at that meeting. So we try to keep it short. It's not everything that happened, but we just are trying to do, a half page or so. That was a long meeting, so it's a little longer. So do give me any comments on that. Via email ideally, but is this about the meeting summary?
My writing stuff.
The 17th, yeah.
Yeah, so if you can, send those to me via email, because I think it's usually more,
Okay, I have a question, though.
yeah.
On page 6 or 7, it says, areas for improvement. Talk with those with experience using step stake to explore such systems for sewered areas. I have nothing wrong with it, no comment, a question about the comment. When is this going to happen, is my question.
And
He's asking, one of the suggestions, there's a lot of suggestions on here.
I understand,
So-
I'm asking this specifically.
Maybe his question is specifically, he wants to know if this is gonna make it.
Yeah. On the step stick, the step stick is a way of getting flow from a building to a sewer that goes to a plant. Usually step stick is dealt with at the pre-designed stage when you know you're going to have a sewer that goes to a plant. We're not there yet. This is a conceptual level design. Generally, like the CWMP and other CWMPs on the Cape, they don't deal with step steg at this time.
But
We've made a presentation on it. We're completely open to using it in the right setting, but we just don't have the data or the information yet to go out and analyze and say, this is the potential in downtown if we did this kind of system. We're not there yet, so we,
Okay,
And just to say, actually, we're gonna get more into this in the next conversation, because we took all of these ideas for improvement, and we've summarized those, plus some additional things that we've heard, and we've summarized those in slides, and we're gonna walk through and tell you exactly how each one has been or will be dealt with. So if
Okay.
you wanna hold continued conversation on that until then,
can I just follow up on this comment?
can you hold till we get to that? Sorry.
Okay, all yours, Stacy.
Okay. So let me walk through today's agenda. After we do our preliminaries here, we're going to talk about revising the hybrid plan. So the first thing we're going to do is look at that section of the meeting summary where you all gave your input. We tried to summarize it then, and in the meeting summary, and I've synthesized it even a little bit further for review to start our meeting off today. And it also, I think, gives you a sense of why the changes were made or the suggestions were made for the revised hybrid plan that we can talk about today. So first, we'll have that review of what the comments and the feedback and the suggestions were. Then we will hear about some of these initial modifications that are reflected on the maps that you all got. A piece of that was reducing the area, or prioritizing the collection areas. So you'll see that on your maps, and we'll talk about that. And then another piece of it was talking a little bit about the type of treatment system, or the collection and treatment system for those collection areas. And in particular, the request was to look more at cluster systems. So an evaluation was done to look at cluster systems as compared with centralized treatment. So we'll spend some time on that as well. So that's really the section of the revision of the hybrid. And there were a couple other small non-traditional kind of changes or increases that are in there as well. Rock Harbor and et cetera. So we'll get into that. The next topic is we're going to talk about pilot demonstration projects for the non-traditionals. So there's the team has developed a methodology for evaluating demonstration projects. So we'll walk through that. Sia's going to walk through that and share some of her initial thoughts and get a discussion on next steps for talking about demonstration projects, moving those forward. And then the last major item is to start to talk in more detail about the financial analysis plan, the approach, and status. You all got an overview of the model, and our team is going to walk through that model and show it to you in more detail. And in particular, there's areas where decisions are going to need to be made about the different variables and the weights of those different variables in the model. And so we hope to have a little bit of discussion about that. So that's the agenda for today. Any questions about the agenda? Okay. A few quick other things. So there was a request that the PowerPoint slides from the tracker meeting that was held early December at the commission, that those slides be made available. The slides on their own are probably not going to be that helpful to people who weren't at the meeting, but they may be helpful to those who were. So in any case, there was the request, so they have been posted. So this is notice that they have been posted to the project website under the Other Resources tab on the website. The Citizens Forum, if you recall, wants to have a session on the work of this group They wanted to get some dates. I thought the most efficient way was for them to offer a handful of dates that they thought worked for them, and then I'll send out a doodle poll to all of you and just get a sense of what you all think about the dates. So you'll see that coming sometime soon. And then also, there was a request for further information and discussion about the 208 plan non-traditional, you weren't calling them bookends. Scenario. So the non-traditional scenario that the commission had been developing for Orleans and neighboring towns. And so they have offered to have a workshop. That information was all provided as part of your non-traditional tech memo. Nonetheless, there's been additional requests for additional conversation about that. So the commission is holding a workshop next Wednesday, January 21st, at their offices in the Innovation Room, 10 a.m.? 9 a.m. 9 a.m. So the panel, all panel members are invited to that meeting, and at that meeting, they will walk through what was it that the commission had proposed initially for non-traditional, and also really understanding how that has changed or how it's different from what you saw as the non-traditional bookend that was presented as part of this process. Is that accurate? Yeah? So you're all welcome to attend. Do you want RSVPs, Patty, or?
I think the room's probably large enough. I think it's fine. People just show up.
Okay. So you are welcome.
Our non-panel members and liaison members, those of us in the audience, are we invited?
Sure, absolutely. It's an open meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any outreach plan, any updates on outreach that anybody has, conversations or outreach that you all have done with your groups, constituencies, et cetera? Okay. Well, keep in mind that you should be communicating with your colleagues, your constituents, so that they do know what's going on here and they do have a chance to give you their thoughts that you can then bring into the room. With that, I think we will launch right into revising the hybrid plan. I do want to remind you, there are a couple places today where we might want to see if we can reach closure. In general, overall, we are not trying to pin down the plan. We're still in the tweaking it phase. If we reach points at which we all seem to be in agreement, we can note those. We're still a work in progress, so hopefully everybody is still approaching this with open-mindedness and thinking about how do we keep moving in the right direction, making this thing better. Okay, so that's the note I want to leave you with on that. Okay. Got it?
Stacy, this is you.
Oh, I'm reviewing.
Yes, yeah.
Good. You can't review yet.
Yeah, you're not
All
done.
right. So this is a summary of what we heard at the December 17th meeting after the small group discussions, as well as some comments that came in subsequent to that. I asked people if you felt like you had additional comments or thoughts that didn't get expressed then to let me know. So I tried to integrate those in as much as I could. I might have missed some details, so you'll let me know if I have. All right, so first of all, we heard a number of suggestions about the traditional collection areas and approaches. The first thing that people seemed pretty excited about the idea of seeing if there were further reductions that could be made, at least in terms of phasing or in terms of prioritization of areas for sewering is there anything else we can do with non-traditionals? If they're really successful that might reduce these collection areas further. Right? And the team's response to that was to create these priority 1 and priority 2 areas. So when Sia walks through that, she'll explain to you what those are, but essentially they're a way to try and say, maybe there's an area of that collection that was slated for collection that won't be necessary if we can really get these non-traditionals to perform. Explore coordination with Eastham and Brewster for possible treatment and disposal sites. So those discussions are underway. And I think we're conscious of the fact that here time can be used as an ally. So as long as it's possible that the actions that where those partnerships are most ripe are not the first thing we have to commit to, then there is more time to allow those partnerships to develop, right? And the timelines of the different towns to come together. Move disposal sites away from residential areas and ensure sufficient buffer with ACEC. So that's still under discussion. We haven't gotten, the team hasn't gotten very far in changing that yet. Disposal sites are still under consideration, and we're not really going to take that any further today. Further explore cluster systems. That's a big part of today's task. Further explore step steg. Detailed analysis, part of a later presentation. Okay, Paul, you wanted to say more about that? Now's your chance.
It's fine as long as we hear something about it. So it's not just up in the air.
Consider off-site septic treatment. This is also, we'll get into this more at a future meeting. All right, then we had suggestions about non-traditional technology sites and approaches. So a concern was raised about PRBs close to the herring run or in ACECs, and you'll hear about that a little bit more as we talk about the selection criteria. So that'll be addressed in part today. Aquaculture risks and concerns are taken into account. Spreadsheet for Hybrid 1 explicitly ranks these, and they're also going to be addressed in the adaptive management plan. Potential regulatory constraints from other federal, state, and local agencies for all non-traditional technologies. This was, some of that was in the non-traditional technology tech memo. And if there are more specific things that come up, we're really going to learn those as we do demonstrations. So I think that's the main point there. The risks of floating constructed wetlands, those are really those risks are really meant to be included in that spreadsheet for Hybrid 1. Rethink fertilizer reduction assumptions in the non-traditional or in all watersheds pending further information. So this was a comment that we received that the group did agree to 25% fertilizer credit across the board. There was a question from some saying, maybe that's in watersheds where we already have a lot of uncertainty because we're relying almost exclusively on non-traditional technologies. And from other people, we heard, even maybe in all watersheds, are we sure we really want to do that? Should we really rethink that? Right now, the response of the team is, let's make sure we attend to that more in adaptive management, where we have the capacity to really check on how well that assumption is playing out and have adaptive responses. So if people really want to revisit changing that in the baseline plan, we can talk about that. But I think our hope for now is that it's something everybody can live with in the baseline plan, and that as long as there's a really clear way that we're addressing it in adaptive.
Stacy?
Yeah.
It's elementary, but we need to make clear that we're talking about 25% of the fertilizer contribution to nitrogen, not 25% of the nitrogen problem.
Right. Yeah, and that's built into all the numbers, but we'll make sure that it's built into the communication.
I recall some uncertainty on that before.
Yes. thought we clarified that, but we'll keep
I'm
clarifying
just
it,
helping
to
you
make
clarify.
I think, Lynn, we're gonna keep the conversation up here for now. Maybe you can jot a note and pass it to Doug. Okay. There were also some specific suggestions about subwatersheds in particular. So Rock Harbor, there was a strong suggestion among many people that we, at least for the start, as a starting point, baseline, we focus on non-traditional rather than collection for Rock Harbor. While other solutions are pursued, including a PRB at Cedar Pond, so that was included in this new revision that you see. For Town Cove, consider a PRB at Town Cove along Main Street, and get the Gibson Ruggles as a secondary one, so that's also now reflected in your new map. More capacity for non-traditionals in Town Cove, again, as a way of reducing the amount of collection area. So that was done as part of the priority 1 and 2 here. Move the location of the proposed aquaculture closer to the shore. The team's response is the exact locations will be figured out later. So, for Pochi, consider coastal habitat restoration instead of floating constructed wetlands. The response was both are used together to achieve required nitrogen removal, and both will need to be expanded if you don't go and use phase 2 for collection in Pochi. And again, it was where do we put the floating constructed wetlands? Same answer. We'll get to that as we get a little further down the process. Consider additional non-traditional instead of collection, so you'll see that in your map. For Aries, maybe too murky for aquaculture, maybe floating constructed wetland or PRB instead. The response was that floating bags are already being used successfully to grow oysters, and there's already an upweller in the marina. So there's some confidence on the part of the team that aquaculture is viable. Lonnie's, consider floating constructed wetlands to avoid a PRB in the ACEC. So this has been made in this phase and will be refined as you go forward. Aquaculture may not be viable. Coastal habitat restoration is proposed, not aquaculture. That is not gear but natural enhancement of wetland areas, and I don't know if that satisfies the concerns of the person who suggested it, if they felt that the living creatures part was the problem or the gear part was the problem. But you can let me know, whoever it was who was concerned about that. Crystal and Pilgrim Pond should prepare for emerging phosphorus, and this is floating constructed wetlands have been considered and are being proposed. And can we say that those address phosphorus? Right. Yeah.
Stacy, just an editorial change. It's Crystal and Pilgrim Lakes.
Lakes.
That needs to, it's in the text as well, so it should be corrected.
A couple other comments. Confirm the potential for floating constructed wetland sites in Nemacoit, and that's been confirmed. PRB at Powwa is on a private road, and this is going to be dealt with as you get into the site selection later in this meeting.
Yep.
Any questions or things I missed? Yes.
Yeah, the question goes back to it's page 3, where it says, it talks about risks. It says spreadsheet for hybrid 1 explicitly ranked these risks, and it's not clear where that is or what risk you're talking about.
There, at the last meeting, everybody got these spreadsheets. These look familiar, you may not be able to see them, but they were spreadsheets, and across the top are the nutrient removal certainty. So certainty being the other side of risk. We've got nitrogen and phosphorus, and then, so for this is Aries Pond, we've got aquaculture, and they're ranked we have. This was at the last meeting. And then we've got
I see where you,
implementation. And so what we did say at that meeting is that if there were, this was our ranking. We gave the system, we have the system of ranking. If people feel that they have believe that there are other rankings, we should talk about that. But based on our ranking of the uncertainty and the certainty, here they are for each subwatershed.
So the idea is those risks are, we are considering those risks, right? You all should be considering them. The team is definitely considering them.
Stacy, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
There's a key point here, too, I think, that we are considering them, they have been considered, but one of the functions of the demo projects, pilot projects, is to get into these in more detail and understand the functions, the siting, the issues related to performance, construction, operation and maintenance, et cetera. There will be, we'll come back to this risk with more information to be able to assess those in more detail. That's not the end. This is just the beginning of that risk assessment. That's why we're having demos and pilots to inform us about the parameters related to risk. Right now, it's somewhat speculative. I think they're relatively right, but not based on site-specific details.
Can I add just briefly to that? I think part of where the risk comes from is our lack of field experience with some of these technologies. And so there's this process of doing demonstrations, and that demonstration verification, if you will, is built directly into the adaptive management plan with these trigger points for at certain times. I've been doing the actual timeline, a Gantt chart, if you will. So there'll be a point where you're making a decision annually, ongoing through the 3-year process, and then at the end. And that will feed into a specific action item. And so the idea is we understand with floating constructed wetlands, coastal habitat restoration, shellfish, and PRBs, which are the 4 main non-traditional technologies we're talking about, that we have to verify, trust and verify. And that's what that process is really designed to specifically do. And so it's articulated in those hybrids so that everyone, it's sort of been named at this point, and that's what we mean by that.
Okay, so I'm just a little confused trying to follow this, because, for instance, where you refer to consider a PRB along Main Street and not at Gibson, there's nothing on the map for a PRB at Main Street, but it's still on the map for Gibson. And where it says, yeah, there won't be a PRB at Lonnie's because that's in the ACEC, it's still here. And the PRB along Rock Harbor, it was pointed out that that section of Rock Harbor goes under saltwater, so a PRB wouldn't work. A further up area of Rock Harbor Road would be possible for a PRB.
I'm about to go through all of those.
Okay, I'm just a little confused trying to match up the comments here with notes about what has been incorporated into the plan, and a plan here that doesn't seem to incorporate any of those.
Those are very accurate comments. And I think what our hope was for today is we would show you the modifications, get some consensus around those changes, and then develop. So this, I would call what you have here the illustration of what we're doing, as opposed to we've done it and here it is finalized.
Okay.
So I was going to take a perfect segue, right, into let's talk about each of the specific revisions and what they mean. It's complicated. I mean, it's not quite, yes, we're going to put a PRB here,
Absolutely.
we're going to get rid of the PRB there. It's more like, how are we going to phase these things and make decisions?
So just then jumping to that bigger picture, I assume that there will be this whole plan, which we've all said is going to be adaptive, and certainly based on initial results of pilot programs and how well they work, and et cetera, et cetera. But I do assume that then we would pick out, at some point, 3 or 4 pilot programs to see how these things work. As part of that, then, while you may have something down, I won't pick on an area, but maybe Lonnie's, where you've got down floating constructed wetland, if it's not one of the pilot programs, or even if it is, will our plan then have layers under it that say, if this alternative technology fails, this is the alternative technology that will then be utilized to address the issue.
Absolutely.
And how many iterations of that do we go through before we get to the point where we say, and I don't want to be a naysayer, but where we say, okay, none of this has worked and we're not going to put more money into yet another alternative technology. We need to go to a more traditional approach.
I can't answer the question for how many, but I can tell you how we're going to get to that answer.
Okay.
I'm going to come up with, through the our team, is going to come up with an adaptive management plan that's got basically a spreadsheet for each sub-watershed that says we're going to try this first. It's going to cascade to this. I think you may recall the graphic from a few meetings ago that said Lonnie's Pond, and there were arrows, and we went out. So I'm trying to articulate that as an actual Gantt chart. And the question that is going to be something that this group wrestles with is there one or is there two? Or are we doing 4 demonstrations concurrently, and we're going to be able to decide after this 3 to 5 year period, you know, what fail mode is or what success mode is? And so that's the process that I think the team envisions for.
I wasn't trying to jump 3 meetings hence. I was just trying to have an appreciation for where
No,
this
I
is
think
going.
it's fair to keep understand the whole process and then get down into the details. Today, we are going to start with how are we going to pick demonstration sites. We're going to get to that, right before the break. What's basically a site selection matrix? What are the criteria? How are we going to weigh them? I'm going to show you that, if I may.
Quick comment, too, on that question. It could be that the demos or pilots are very clear that, yes, this thing is fantastic, and we can see that it clearly works, and we can then go forward with confidence. It could be that it says the other thing, that this is clearly not something we want to entertain. It's very likely that it could come out in the middle. That it could be, well, we found out a lot about this thing. We found out that this particular design parameter doesn't work. But boy, if we change this, then it could work. It's very hard to predict that at this point.
And I think in terms of site specificity, there is every possibility that something might work very well in one site and it won't in another, and vice versa.
That is absolutely true, and that's one of the challenges we have in pick-up demo sites. And one of the reasons why we've been reluctant at this point to say this is the demo site, because it's very critical that selection process has to be done very, very systematically and objectively, so that we're not just, as in Waquoit Bay, saying, hey, here's a beach, let's put a PRV there, let's see if it works. We really need to do this right, because a lot hangs on these demos, and we really need to monitor and design them carefully, so that when we come out of it, it may be, as I said, we can tweak it, and we have a higher confidence it goes over here, in which case we lean on Brian Dudley and DEP, instead of drawing the line at 4 years or 5 years, to say, hey, the results of this are really optimistic, and we need another year to do this over here. So that's predicting the future, which we can't do now, and I think we have to be careful not to try to do that at this point, but that's the protocol.
And with that, I'm going to try to walk through, we tried to synthesize your feedback. And I think a really creative suggestion for setting up priorities, the picture of a bullseye came out of the last meeting, which seemed to resonate with a lot of the different breakout groups. All right, and now I've got a pointer, which is just great. And so the first set of revisions that we made had to do with the downtown Town Cove area. And so let's just focus on purple for right now. We'll get to the red and the salmon next. But we're looking right here at the purple and the very light purple. In the first hybrid, this whole area, both purples, were one color, and they were sewered, the whole area. What we've done now is we've broken it into a priority 1 area, which is here, and a priority 2 area, which is here. The priority 1 area is selected because it's the main commercial downtown area, and from CWMP on forward, there are sanitary needs, there are, excessive pumping, there are economic needs, And so that downtown area is being recommended as a practical and necessary and important area to be sewered. Now, instead of lumping priority area 2 and just sewering the whole thing, it was brought out, and it was in one of the alternatives on those big spreadsheets, that a PRB right along here on Main Street could replace that priority sewer area 2. So the plan would be to do a PRB demonstration, whether it's here, whether it's here, whether it's here, whether it's, here. We're going to talk about where that first cut demonstration is going to be. If that PRB works, then this would go away, and a PRB would go down Main Street instead. And we actually discussed back and forth, should this map have the PRB or not? But it is in the spreadsheet for the kilogram removal that it accomplishes, and it's over 1,000 kilograms. And so later when we talk about where a good PRB demonstration site is, this one might be it. It might be a good site. The reason that, so then from a counting the kilograms to get to our targets perspective, we realize we've got 1,030 kilograms removed by that PRB, and some additional wetlands. You'll see there's a few small, either floating constructed wetlands.
It says aquaculture.
Yeah, aquaculture, and I think in this iteration, we put some floating constructed wetlands in there too to enhance that, which was another recommendation. And we would still use, if the PRBs work, this one is an important contributor to nitrogen reduction. It's about 900 kilograms, as I recall. So I have not removed this. We have not removed this because it is still part of the solution pending PRBs working. So that's why we just wouldn't start with that. Now, so the other, I think I said, yep, I think I've said everything that I has on the slide. We've got the Main Street PRB, additional aquaculture, and some floating constructed wetlands and coastal habitat restoration, all in this very large, shallow water body of Town Cove. And so I guess we might want to start with reactions to that, feelings about that, and this Gibson Road PRB. If we don't have the Gibson Road PRB, we could look at other non-traditionals, more floating wetlands, more aquaculture. So that's where we're at for now.
Okay. Comments?
I'm just curious. You've got the 3 little tiny dots up there, and I doubt that's how big they are. Can we draw those to scale at some point so that we can get an idea of how big these really are?
If you look actually in the spreadsheets,
Yeah,
they give you area.
I understand that. Can we get that transposed to the
Visual.
pictures?
Yeah, once we decide how much we want to do. And I think that's really the question.
Yeah, I think it's
Do we want
important
an
because it's a
acre
good graphic. We could look
20?
at that and say, oh, great, that's removing bazillions of tons of nitrogen, and then they put it out there and it's the size of the Queen Mary.
Well, it's 2 acres. And that's what it is.
It's 80,000 square feet.
Yeah, it is.
And sure, I think if it helps you guys visualize it. But right now, I think there's been a sense that we've got, we could expand it.
I
So
understand.
once we think about, do we want to go 10 acres
See,
or 20?
I think Jim's comment is good, though, because in Town Cove, if you double the size of those, it may not matter. But if you go over to Aries Pond or some other place and you double the size of it to get it to scale, it will matter.
And those are to scale, actually. The little ones are to
Okay,
scale.
well, that's good.
Yeah, the little ones are to scale. But we'll put Town Cove to scale. But
That's good. I apologize for my ignorance, but was there any thought process to why the school property isn't tied into the priority 1? I'm just thinking as a matter of, could they have their own system, or is there a different, just a lot of kids and a lot of people, and, it's a big part of downtown? Just curious. It's around Bowling Pond. There's an emphasis on Bowling Pond. Just curious.
I think it has to do with the roads. You want to answer that?
Yeah, I think it does have to do with the roads.
It's the roads.
Just to make a
It's a matter of efficiency.
right.
Yeah, pipes have to go under. So, right, and I'll exactly tell you why. This road,
Yep.
is where the pipe would go. And you wouldn't just do it for the school, you'd then be doing all of this.
Okay.
And so we wanted to really limit a priority one area to just that.
Any other questions or comments on this as a direction for town code?
Yeah, Sia, you neglected to say that you also took Rock Harbor and Cedar Pond out of the dark purple.
Next slide.
Oh,
Can I go on?
you were focusing on Main Street, is that what it was?
Well, this is a great example of how it's tough to just focus on watersheds, because the town wasn't built with watershed boundaries, right? So we're working with physical boundaries, but for the purposes of describing these, I thought, because we're counting the kilograms in watersheds, we talk by watershed. But yes, Rock Harbor.
Thank you.
Judy?
See, at what point in this process do we look at aquaculture in more detail for Town Cove as it relates to navigational issues? Also, whether or not aquaculture could be allowed again in the Nauset Estuary, which I believe it's not. New ones are not
New ones
right
are not.
now.
Yep.
And the
But
fact
a
that
propagation program is.
It is, okay.
And that's what we're really talking about here, is increasing the numbers of shellfish, maybe not doing private aquaculture. But I think your question is a really good one. I think there's two things that are happening concurrently to more sort of rigorously specify. One is a whole study of shellfish in Orleans. Right. And some of that preliminary work is being done, and the interviews are being done, and conversations are being had, and all of that to specify it. Originally, though, when I first looked at the possibility, having talked to the harbor master and DMF back in September, there was a sense that there's a carrying capacity that's good there. Quahogs are growing very, very effectively there. There's an existing shellfish grant that grant itself could be expanded to 2 acres, which would get you a few million more. And it's just, we're not quite there in the process. If Mike seems to have a sense of.
No, I don't have a sense of anything, frankly.
He admits it,
I do want to make.
He has lots of opinions, so good.
I do want to make a comment, just to sort of expand a little bit on what Sia is saying about aquaculture. As many of you know, or all of you know, the Board of Selectmen voted recently to put $25,000 into a analysis of the history of aquaculture in Orleans, what the practices have been, what the limitations have been, the ability to measure water quality improvements, but also just a general putting together a database of aquaculture in Orleans because of the potential for expansion of that, independent of the wastewater nitrogen reduction program. And others have recently proposed that there could be substantially more in Town Cove than what we have here. So there's going to be field investigations and a lot of other stuff done, including a workshop we're planning on aquaculture with people from Wellfleet and Mashpee and other places to come in and really look at it as something that fits the venue of Orleans very well. So that this, what we talk about aquaculture here, we're really talking about a minimal amount of aquaculture for nitrogen reduction purposes for the CWMP. There's a lot more potential, or could be a lot more potential here than what we're talking about. And there's parallel efforts ongoing to look at that and maximize that. And it's, of course, it's dependent upon market conditions, all of the biology and chemistry and all of the other stuff related to aquaculture. But that's going on in parallel to this.
So should I can she do a follow-up and then I come in?
Well, to follow up comment, that's really good, what you just said about workshop and everything and the history of aquaculture in Orleans. I believe, though, that it would be better to not restrict it to Orleans, because these are shared estuaries. So Eastham has a lot of experience with aquaculture, especially in Mill Pond. They had a whole facility over on Hemingway.
Salt Pond.
Excuse me,
Salt Pond.
Salt Pond, excuse me, my mistake. Henry Lind is an absolute unbelievably good resource for you in Eastham. Sandy McFarlane, certainly for Orleans. Two people that you absolutely must include in your
Yeah,
homework, and at least in my opinion.
good. The comment on Eastham is good.
Well, same for Chatham with Pleasant Bay, if you're
Yeah,
going that way.
yeah, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to restrict it to Orleans, but,
Watch out when you say Orleans, because we are shared
yeah,
estuaries.
very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go back to Chris's comment on the middle school, and I assume they have their own system. I don't know what kind it is and how effective it is. I know there's a lot of other systems in the downtown area that have their own systems, so and I'm assuming Stantec has looked at that, and I'm just wondering, as part of the plan then, are we going to look at those systems? How efficient are they now, and in the future, what should they become? And how efficient would they be? In other words, when they reach their life, what are they replaced with? And how effective is that? And compare that to the 100% reduction, which would be sewering. So the cost of eventually down the road replacing these systems with what if, rather than,
There are some slides coming, as soon as we get through this, that Steve has actually done a really rigorous analysis of the cluster systems and their nitrogen removal efficacy and all of that. So you guys are great. You're one step ahead of us.
One other
Go ahead,
thing,
John.
the police station is likely to be rebuilt or renovated over the next 3 to 5 years. And its current system, according to the chief who spoke with yesterday, would not meet any kind of standard and will have to be replaced.
So those are two properties to definitely take a closer look at in the context of where we've drawn the priority one line. So let's go through that. Great. So next was Rock Harbor. As you may recall, the original Hybrid 1 had Rock Harbor sewered. And you will see there's no sewering there anymore. What we have instead is a PRV here that is on Locust Street, and a PRV that goes about 3/4 of the way down Rock Harbor Road. And I looked at a GIS map, frankly, and tried to determine exactly how far up you needed to get to avoid this flooding issue. This may not be the perfect line, but I think for planning purposes, it's close. I was going to actually drive it soon, but
So, I'm sorry, putting it there instead of an extension beyond Locust down Namskaket because you
Well-
wanted to gather those properties on the other side of that? Is that
yeah,
the-
there is a fairly stiff nitrogen reduction. It's
Yeah.
it's almost 2,000 kilograms, as
Yeah.
I recall. And so putting it up here, you really don't get any of these properties. So that's
Got
why Rock Harbor Road is the preferred road. And even with that, there's still a need for IA systems because there's no room in the water for our in situ shellfish, floating wetlands, coastal habitat restoration. It's a marina, and it's narrow.
And a crowded
So-
one.
Right. So that's why it is up now. So that was the plan for Rock Harbor. It was to go from traditional to non-traditional by these technologies. Paul.
I don't understand that PRB. The area that's impaired is the boat basin, not the marsh. And it looks like that is trying to protect nitrogen discharge into the marsh.
Fair question.
Why?
Can I answer that before you go on to your next one?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the watershed line. I'm going to draw it the best I can. Here's the watershed line. The water, the nutrients that are coming from here are going in this direction into the water and into the boat basin. It's not just the kilograms coming from here that are affecting the boat basin, it's the whole watershed. And so the idea is the waste, the groundwater is by convention, if you will, is not flowing into here. It's flowing in a sort of fan pattern.
Right, I understand.
So that's why.
But there's been a dispute over time of what's causing the impairment in Rock Harbor, and whether or not it's groundwater nitrogen migration, or whether it's the collection of material washing down from the marsh on low tide, and what's washing in from Cape Cod Bay on the high tide. And that settles into the boat basin, and as it stews, it raises nitrogen levels.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think this is an issue of the groundwater impairing Rock Harbor Road, and I think it's an issue we need to have resolved, and it's an issue that Mike was going to address with the Cape Cod Commission. So it seems to me that may be a questionable need at this point until this whole issue of Rock Harbor, the impairment of Rock Harbor and the cause for it is resolved.
Well, and you can add to this, part of the reason why this has gone from a sewer plan to a non-traditional plan is to allow the time for that exact analysis to occur first. And the point is to have a plan that's a placeholder in many ways. And as we describe the plan in this adaptive management plan document, the idea is there has to be an identification of uncertainties and a plan for resolving them. And we're not going to resolve that in the next 2 months and 4 meetings. So the plan is, what are we going to say if the kilograms from the MEP report are right? What are you going to do? Are you going to sewer, or are you going to look for non-traditionals? The group last week said, look for non-traditionals. Here they are. But before any non-traditional gets built, the analyses of what's really the problem is going to happen first. Is there a problem with that approach?
No, it's fine. Let's leave it.
Jane? I have to agree with that comment. Eastham is really in favor of pursuing the use attainability analysis as a first step. Not that I'm here to dissuade Orleans from pursuing other alternatives, but
And that's the first step.
you know, just from a logical standpoint, we think that that is the best course of action, and we really are looking for Orleans to support us in that combined effort to pursue those regulatory changes.
Just a comment on that before we move on. We had a presentation, probably 2 years ago now, with the boards on the use attainability question. That's a very complex issue that, for the reasons Paul pointed out, I believe is appropriate to pursue, especially in the lower reach of this, where it is a marina, and where the most, if there are, there's not even a question that there are impairments there, because the MEP study basically said that this has always been a depositional zone, and that there hasn't been eelgrass there, and aquaculture has been questionable, at least in the marina area. Whether that's true or not, the use attainability analysis that would go into, this is probably a good subject for a separate workshop, frankly, because it's very complex. Use attainability analyses are very complex, very expensive, very time-consuming, and there's only been, well, depends on how you define it, but there's only been one use change allowed in the U.S. Through a use attainability analysis and water quality standards modification. That was up in Boston Harbor. However, the Clean Water Act is written with it right there, which we think applies in this situation. Meetings with DEP and EPA have indicated they don't want to even deal with it until we have a plan here that addresses the nitrogen, looks at stormwater, looks at fertilizer, looks at all the impacts, looks at the potential for moving ahead with the CWMP. At the same time, in a parallel process, we need to consider whether these uses are actually attainable and where the uses are attainable, because DEP is not ready to bisect the watershed and say the downstream section is where the nitrogen reduction is required only, and therefore, because there's a marina there, you can get by without nitrogen control. They're also looking at nitrogen reduction in the watershed that feeds it through the stream. So they haven't agreed to bisect it in that way, nor to entertain a use attainability analysis until we've gone down the road and get better information on what the alternatives are. However, we need to pursue that, but it's a longer course thing. It's a lot of money to pay for use attainability. I think it's the right thing to do, but probably not right now in terms of moving along with the revised plan.
If I may just say, Jane, certainly the votes on record at this point for the Board of Selectmen is we fully support the use attainability analysis study. We recognize all that Mike has to say, but we fully support it, and we look forward to being a good partner with East Hampton in doing this and running on through, because I think we both believe it is the right thing to do.
Judy?
Continuing on the theme of partnerships with our sister towns, I would also encourage our selectmen to seek some funds from our sister towns to add to that $25K for the history of aquaculture in these shared estuaries.
Just following up on UAA, I believe there are 6 major variables in this watershed. Combinations of Rock Harbor and Cedar Pond and how you deal with them. And they are all contingent on a variety of regulatory approvals. And if you have a hiccup with one, all of a sudden you lose one of the options and you got to go to another. We have, and I support the UAA, but having spent some time in the regulatory world myself, I know when somebody comes in with something that has only been accomplished once in the United States, the question is, what are the other alternatives that you have looked at, and why don't they work? That's where we are. And we have just heard from the one person who was intimately involved with that one UAA conversion, because Mike Dominica did it, okay? So he's had some experience with it. So we're lucky to have the one victor in this room.
I can't take complete guilt for that.
A little attributed.
Let's just say for now, I mean, I think the idea here, are we moving in the right direction, right? Moving away from collection and more toward non-traditionals as our solutions in Rock Harbor, still knowing that if we draw our timeline of when we're going to start implementing solutions in Rock Harbor, it might be a little further down our timeline, right? Knowing all of these other things on there. Yeah.
I guess the only thing I'd say with that is, seeing the IAs here, if we don't know where we're going in this area, because there are so many things up in the air, I have a hard time asking people to invest the capital on their properties. I mean, septic systems, Title V systems in Rock Harbor area are very costly. They're raised systems, we have high groundwater problems, there's a lot of issues there. To go to people who live there and say, we wish to have you invest, in some cases, you're going to end up with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to put these systems in with some questionable results, where we may well be soaring down the line. I have a hard time with that one. I think that's not, I don't think that's a solution that we'd want to look at there. It may be a long-range solution if we find that, yes, the PRBs work okay, we just need a little more, but going into it with all these unknowns, I think we're asking a lot of those residents.
Would it be accurate to say that the IA system piece of this is also not being pushed immediately, that it is also
I think from a timeline perspective, like if you think about the Gantt chart for Rock Harbor, the first 5 years, I think, is resolving the uncertainties. I mean, that's what the plan is for Rock Harbor, honestly.
Before we look at any kind of remediation there?
Before, well, maybe Cedar Pond, and this is, again, we have to, let me just say, we have to decide exactly what the timeline is going to be. We're going to give you our approach, and it's probably going to include a lot of these studies need to have, these are the uncertainties, these are, this is the boat basin, those 6 points, these need to get resolved first, and a timeline for resolving them. And after we understand really what the problem is, and I think Paul's comments are really, important to say, well, is it the boat basin that's having inputs from surface issues, or is it the groundwater? And then, once we know what's causing the problem, if it's groundwater or if it's surface water, then it's a plan that's a non-traditional plan. And at that point, we'll know how big the floating constructed wetland has to be, too, and whether the PRBs work. But until then, I don't think the idea would be to...
Floating constructed wetland, I thought you had just said that there isn't room.
There's room for 400 square feet.
I would even be
400 square
surprised if there'd be room for that
So
in
we'll
Rock
see
Harbor.
how it performs.
Really?
When we talk about, well, that's going to be down the road, and we use the term timelines, is there any guesstimate or way to guesstimate what we're talking about in terms of timelines?
So we will get there. We're not there yet. I think when we come next with the adaptive management initial plan, am I right, Sia?
That's not the next meeting, but I think we're talking about in February, end of February. They will have a timeline, and they're gonna be 5-year increments. And that's sort of been the regulatory framework that's been set up for us. 3 years for piloting and making decisions in 5-year increments, and I think probably Rock Harbor wouldn't be the first 5 years. It would probably be, doing these studies in the first 5 years and then implementing in the second 5 years.
We're already starting on this, but before, just 1 second, Jim. We're already starting to put this timeline together with, by watershed, what projects would come in which watershed and demos and everything else. One of the reasons is because in order to get a financial model and when we need bonds and how we're funding it and what the costs are, has to go into that as well. So it's starting, it's already started, but it will probably, as Sia says, not next workshop, but the one after, we'll sit down with, okay, now, given all the changes, here's what we're looking at in terms of sequencing, and here's what it means with regard to preliminary financial look at it, et cetera. So.
And let me ask a question back regarding that. Do the stakeholders have a sense that there's a timeline that you prefer seeing?
Yesterday. No, I don't mean to be facetious on that. To what you just said, though, if we're talking 5-year increments, and we're down 10 years, and we're looking at something, if during that time frame we begin to realize that this is not really going in a direction we had hoped it might go, that's going to bring it back as a question to us as to whether we change direction and go to traditional. Will that not also impact what we come up with a final overview of what we're going to propose as we start looking at some of these timelines? Do you understand the question?
I believe I do, and yes, it will. I mean, there's a curve of uncertainty that as you go out, the uncertainty increases. To try to predict 5 years from now is one thing. 10 years, it's much more uncertain. I think we are looking at this in 5-year increments, with like 5 years being a first phase for certain activities that we have relatively good confidence in, including demos, the right places for demos, the right things. The next 10 years will respond to that first 5 years. Whatever that is going to be based to a large degree on that first 5 years. We can predict that a little bit, but I don't think we can see past a 10-year window. And more we're starting to say, this plan really isn't it will take 30 to 40 years to get through the whole thing. But in terms of what we can see right now, 5 years and then a 10-year total recalibration, relook at it to make sure we're on the right track.
Thank you.
Yeah, I keep getting the feeling that people are looking at all of the non-traditionals and say those are all the demos. We're only going to put out a couple of demos, I'm assuming. And if they work, then we'll talk about some of these other places. And you said we're going to be talking about that later today or whenever.
We're going to walk before we run.
Right, about where the demos are going to be and how many we're going to use. And then the rest are down the road. So think of those as the phase 2 or 3, depending on how the demos turn out. So we're not talking about them all at once. And it's like the 2 purples and the 2 reds. Same thing. And then the greens, I would even say green is number 3. That's not even on here, that's down in South Orleans.
All right, now we're at the red.
We may get there.
So we have a priority 1 and priority 2 for the Meeting House Poche area. These are 2 separate sub-watersheds, just to be aware. Meeting House, as we discussed last time, is a highly dense area that had a lot of IAs necessary if we were going to get the nitrogen removal that we have to, because it's also a very busy boating area that's quite crowded. A lot of navigation, the opening to it's very shallow. So when I did a boat tour of it, I identified a few areas where floating wetlands and coastal habitat restoration could be expanded in one corner, but the rest of it's moorings. And the plan is therefore to make it a priority 1 sewer area. Makes a lot of sense because it's density, and it will be discharging. That one's going to Atlanta, right? And so the flow would go to a different, would not go to Tri-Town. Poche was initially, in the hybrid 1 that we presented, also sewered because it has a fairly stiff nitrogen reduction goal itself, Poche. Lot of load going in there. And hearing you, instead of that salmon-colored area, which is about 630 kilograms worth of nitrogen being sewered along with Meeting House, we're going to give shellfish and floating constructed wetlands a chance. And if they perform from a nitrogen reduction, from a management, from a longevity, from all the perspectives that are important to us, if we were going to really expand this, that extra 600 kilograms will come from a combination of habitat restoration, coastal habitat restoration, and some of those floating wetlands. So that's a revision to the plan for that area.
Questions? Yes.
So the red area around Meeting House, does that represent 100% of the septic nitrogen
No.
removal?
It represents 100% of the kilograms that need to be removed to achieve the MEP kilogram reduction target. And that's what we're doing. So we have a present load. I'm going back 2 meetings.
Right.
We have an MEP threshold, and it's the TMDL. We have a TMDL. There's a
Right.
total maximum daily load, number of kilograms per day and then year, that are allowed to go into Meeting House.
But I think what you're saying is that's less than that original interpretation of MEP that said 100% of the Meeting House Pond watershed must be sewered in order to meet the TMDL. I'm not trying to get into that crazy whole discussion about now, later, what we're looking at, which criteria.
So we have chosen to look at kilograms. And if you take the flow and you multiply it by the 26.25, you get the kilograms that are prescribed. It's the way we've done it. So does it meet the percent? I'd have to look. I didn't look at percent. I'm counting kilograms for this process.
So I won't put Brian on the spot to say, is that going to be acceptable by DEP? We'll put that off.
Well, I mean, I think the only thing is that whatever you come up with, we just want to run it. We want to run a confirmatory scenario on it to see what we end up with.
Okay.
Concentration.
Because the original plan on this called for, I believe, both the sewering as well as some of the non-traditional, which I personally thought was a great idea because we could start removing some of the immediate nitrogen and fixing it. And now I see that all of those are gone. And we're just back to the sewering, which is fine, but I'm also hearing that this is something less than 100%. So,
well, and so I think there's 150 kilograms that are still being removed by non-traditionals in Meeting House.
okay, so I don't see that. I'm sorry. Am I
So it's not just the
missing
sewer.
something?
So it's not just right. It's.
You didn't remove any.
I
of the
didn't
non-traditional.
remove. I haven't taken away any non-traditionals anywhere.
Okay, there's nothing on here. That's why
Yeah,
I'm
Okay,
confused.
so-
there's a C in the middle of it.
There's a C
In the middle of the
right
middle.
there.
In the middle of it. Okay.
C right in the middle.
Judith,
Yeah, I see a little C.
this side, this package.
I'm sorry.
Believe me, I don't know where they get
Forgive
them
me,
off.
I'm sorry. I'm just.
No, yeah, no, it's there. That is, I'm glad you brought that up. The sewering is there, and 150 kilograms worth of coastal habitat restoration is still there also.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
The big difference is, the difference is that Pochi is no longer part of the sewer plan, it's all non-traditionals. That's what the difference is.
Although there does raise a question that we don't have to deal with now, but on priority water bodies, and Meeting House from the beginning has been identified as a priority water. Given the uncertainties in modeling and other things, is there a place where the town would like to put a little bit of belt and suspenders on there because of the importance not only of the remediation, but of the timing of the remediation? The cost would have to be weighed and other factors, but that is a question at some point we may want to deal with. Not now, but
And last but not least, South Orleans was considered a priority 2 area in the Plan Hybrid 1 from about a month ago. This was a sewer area, it was an area to be sewered, but it is now, the sewering potential is put out farther in the implementation timeline so that the impact of the alternatives, the non-traditional scenarios, can be fully understood. And if the non-traditionals work, we wouldn't bother sewering South Orleans at all, and instead we'd put floating constructed wetlands and coastal habitat in that beautiful Pleasant Bay. And so that is a change in a response to the request to shrink the sewer area, with a sense that we have to see the results in the first 5 years, and then make a decision. I think speaking to, so when is this going to happen? We see if they work in the first 5 years. And if they do, we don't sewer there, we use them in Pleasant Bay as well.
And just to say, the other comment that happened, that came around this sewer area in South Orleans, was the possibility of greater collaboration with neighboring towns. And so by having the sewer priority a little lower, for a little further down into the future, it allows for those timelines to catch up, and that collaboration possibility becomes more real for potentially shifting the way that, if collection even still does become required, there may be other ways that it could be done in collaboration.
So we're going to figure out the what, whether we collect, and then how, while we're watching to see if the demonstrations are really the preferred alternative anyway.
Yes, I have submitted some comments on this to the staff, but let me share them with others, if that's okay. If you look at this plan, the right-hand green spot
Yes?
there on Portanimmocket Road encompasses a significant area, and in fact has very few homes, and significant land in that area is already protected with conservation restrictions. So it is extremely uneconomic to sewer there. Second, just above the priority 2 box with the arrow, on Quonset Road, right there, that is watershed land, shown to be sewered, but does not need to be sewered because it is controlled by the town.
Okay.
Significant piece of land that should be taken out. The third piece is on Route 39. It's white, right there.
Right.
That is not to be sewered, yet if you look at it carefully, it is far more efficient to sewer because the lots are much smaller. And therefore you can sewer that and take out some of the areas that have larger lots. Finally, the bottom of this shows that the largest organic farm in Orleans is going to become one of the largest cluster treatment plants in the town of Orleans. I think that is a terrible mistake. I have watched this farm for my entire life, and the current owners took an abandoned, overgrown chicken farm that everybody had forgotten and spent years creating what is there today. They are the promoters of the successful farmers market in Orleans, including the only winter farmers market on Cape Cod, which we have in Orleans. They are so sensitive about their planting that they don't even have town water because it is chlorinated. I think we need to remove that site from this map right now. And I would think, as I've looked at, two things I want to add. One, where it says 46 Tar Kiln Road on that map, that is an industrial section in the town of Brewster. In our earlier CWMP, we looked at that area as being a joint Brewster-Orleans treatment area. We need to begin to communicate with Brewster about their plan, because we haven't heard much at this table. Finally, under the H, under South, there is another site on Namquoit Road.
Eight.
Right
Here.
there.
Yeah.
If you compare the capacity of that site, based on your 28 sites that you evaluated, it is almost as efficient as Checkerberry Farm, and it is 1/4 the size. It is capable of handling all the effluent from those green areas.
Okay, so remove this, just, I want to summarize what you just said.
Yep.
This doesn't need, remove
Right.
this from the sewer footprint, remove this
Adjust that.
area from the sewer footprint. You guys are taking notes, right?
Yep. Partial.
Add this area,
Yep.
remove this
Yep.
as a discharge, disposal, treatment and disposal site, and pursue this one instead.
Pursue it, because, let me explain why we would pursue it. Of all the sites that are on our plan right now, that one is vacant. I believe it is potentially available, and we should move to acquire it for our future services. And if we do not use it for treatment, it can then be merged into about 40 acres of open space that we have already acquired. So
And then the other point was to look at a site here.
let's have a conversation.
Park Hill Road in Brewster. Yep,
Okay?
okay, thank you.
Sue?
I'm going to try and be nice.
That is one of the ground rules.
And say, yeah,
I don't
and
think
say,
it's phrased tries.
yeah, and say that there's a lot of conversation going on, but nobody seems to be talking to each other. And as the country song goes, if my phone still ain't ringing, I guess it still ain't you. If we have never been contacted by Orleans except to receive finished products and assumptions to which we have stated for years before we started our own work that we couldn't comment because we didn't have anything to comment. We couldn't comment without our own work. We are approaching the end of our planning. I appreciate the fact that everybody's hung out and waited for us. And we would be delighted at any time to meet with Orleans and discuss in whatever graphic detail everyone would like, what our proposals are, what our alternatives are, which I should state up front have no sewering in them at all, and whether or not there are opportunities for us to do projects together. In fact, our consultant and I met with Mike and Patty to have a basic discussion about where we are now and what our plans are. So I would just like to say that we're not kind of sitting over on the other side of the town boundary over there twiddling our thumbs.
That was very nicely said. And I probably should respond to that because we did have the meeting with the board a month or so ago. We've been communicating with Nate and I think yourself and
No, with Mark.
Nelson.
Nate Weeks.
Nate's our consultant.
Nate's theirs.
I'm sorry. I flipped. I saw.
They all blend
That's all
together
right.
after a while.
We
But
have been talking.
Scott's in the back,
I understand.
wondering
I
why we
understand.
don't remember
When you
Mark.
said, yeah, I get it now. I'm got my east and west mixed up. Good point. Let's do it. Let's get together.
I just wanted to share, one of the major comments from the informational meeting I had last week with the Orleans Chamber. It was fairly well attended and had a different, set of individuals, businesses there, and kind of dovetails what Alan said, but a lot of the conversation was around South Orleans and the concern for the groundwater quality for the organic farm there, because they do use wells come out of the ground, and so there's a lot of concern, and we wanted to know a little bit more information about that. And so I just wanted to bring that up, that we did have that discussion.
Plenty of nitrogen.
Stacy, I just wanted to add that the Tarkale Creek sub-watershed is recognized in the MEP as requiring 50% nitrogen removal. So that's another reason that you would want to add nitrogen to it. And it's kind of interesting, if they have a farm there that's using wells, they maybe have an in-place fertigation scheme going right now.
Exactly.
They got chickens.
Stacy, let me just make one other comment as I think about it. My sister and brother and I own a piece of land that's very close to this in the town of Brewster, and we put a conservation restriction on it several years ago, and there was a provision in that conservation restriction that that parcel could be used for effluent disposal.
Tell them the address.
How big is it?
Generous contribution.
Okay.
Haven't heard
So
that.
we got a good sense
Gave away a
of
boat.
suggestions of how to move this. We were moving in the right direction, and we have suggestions for more direction to move on that, so I think the team has good marching orders on that. We are very tight on time, because we need to move into talking about cluster satellite central systems, and so we want to, let's move into that right now, and we know we have to do this to find it needed, so.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Calabro from Stantec. You've sort of seen me before. So today we're going to have a discussion on cluster versus centralized collection and treatment for Orleans, primarily in the highly developed areas, which are basically the dark purple area that's here we show. So in preparing for this meeting, I'll just say that you know, we're talking with Stacy, and I had this thought that maybe maybe you folks on this panel, because you know Stantec is a very large company. If you go to our website, you see all these massive projects. That maybe you would have thought that we don't know anything about cluster systems. We don't do cluster systems. All we do is big projects. So I thought maybe I would just take a minute, and I went through my office, projects that I'm working on in my office or have worked on. And you know, there are 7 projects here that all sort of fall within the size range. Of course, I work in an office in Westford, and we do a lot of work around New England, and there are a lot of smaller plants. So these are 7 plants that we've worked on that are all sort of fall in the category. Mashpee Commons, you've probably heard of. Some of you probably have been there. That is a privately developed facility. I'll show you what a site map looks like. Some of the other projects, the Kensington Woods project is actually a step system with Arenco equipment that we have in our office that we looked at. Private developer, 50 to 60 homes. He wants it really staged. He really wanted to use the Arenco equipment. And, you know, we made him do everything right, and so he's using it. Stowe, Mass. was a 55 community with a bunch of cluster-type condominiums. We designed a small 9,900 gallon per day system for them. They didn't have the same nitrogen requirements that you folks had. Bridges at Mashpee is a project that's under construction right now. It's a 6,000 gallon per day system, you know, small like some of the systems. It was designed in our office to hit 3 milligrams per liter total nitrogen. Sheraton 4 Points right in Eastham is a project that we've worked on for a long, long time. It's a fast system. We've had different levels of success. Not as good of a nitrogen removal as some of the newer processes can get. Very Fine is a project that I designed a number of years ago. It's an amphidrone process in a nitrogen-sensitive area. And interesting one in Newbury, New Hampshire, that's where the Sunapee ski area is. They have a little community called Blodgett Landing of all these little quarter-acre sites. that are right on the lake, and they needed a treatment. So there's a cluster design.
How old is Kensington Woods?
Kensington Woods is not under construction yet.
Oh,
It's in the review and approval process. This is just a picture of Mashpee Commons. I happen to have this, and I can bring information on the other systems at some later date if you wanted. But you can see that it's a very dense area. It's a common area of mixed use. You know, 2 or 3 story buildings. It's very nice. You walk around, and it's very walkable. And so, originally they started by putting like individual septic tanks and septic systems when it first started, and that didn't really work very well, and it messed them up. So Mashpee Commons built their own treatment plant on their own property right here. Originally started at 40,000 gallon per day facility, was upgraded to 80,000, and right now we just finished the construction to do it to 160,000 gallons per day. And, they use that facility because right now you can see here there are no sewers. This is sort of a future area. So I think the plan is that eventually they'll take this area and they'll bring it all to their treatment.
So what happened with the septic systems, and what are those lines?
The lines
And what
that
kind
you-
of a plant is that?
The lines you see are just major sewer routes, pump station sewer lines. And the plant has been upgraded to a membrane treatment system that can do 3 milligrams per liter total nitrogen.
So that's the effluent standard?
That's the effluent standard we use, correct, right. Mashpee Commons, they want to get down as low as possible. It helps them in their future development requirements, so that was really big for them.
Are the septic tanks still in place and operating?
No, they're all gone.
Why is that?
Well, because basically they just collect, it was easier to abandon the septic tanks and just collect all the raw wastewater. There's actually, I can't quite get my pointer to work here, but there's, you can't quite see the wording, but there's a pump station right here. So
Yeah, I can see it.
all the flow, from the old downtown area comes to this pump station, and this is actually a force main to the treatment.
So it's a gravity system to the pump station and a force main to the treatment plant?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
There might be a smaller pump station on this side of the road, and one of the things that Mashpee Commons did is, this is a public area. There's a police station, fire station, elderly housing. As a community gesture, they connected those folks to their system so they wouldn't have to build their own, $700,000, $800,000 system.
What's the physical size of the wastewater treatment plant, and is that, so that's on town-owned property?
No, that's on Mashpee Commons. This is completely private.
Okay.
They built it all themselves. Right here, what you're seeing is really the building. It's a little bit bigger than that with the infiltration basins that go with it.
But the size, the approximate size of the plant is,
I think the building itself is about 60 foot by 60 foot square.
Okay.
There are below-grade tanks in front, and then there are the leaching beds that are fenced in the back. And, they put the plant here, obviously, they wanted to get it away from their very valuable property, which made sense. So, just to give you a sense that, we do this work all the time.
Just for information, what are those total areas, a quarter acre or a half acre?
For that treatment plant? I think that's about a 2 to 3 acre area.
2 to 3 acres.
Yep. The area's a little larger because they have the ability to build some new infiltration beds if they ever need to for future expansion.
So in other words, it's expandable?
It's expandable even more than it currently is, correct.
Based on my experience, that'd be about 2-3 acres, that would be normal.
Right, I think the ultimate expansion is 275,000 gallons.
And right now?
180.
Thank you.
And they're running, a lot less than that, obviously.
Right.
Anyway, so let's get into our analysis. I think a meeting or so ago, we did talk a little bit about cluster versus central, and it was a little bit general. So, the last 2 or 3 weeks, we did a little more thorough conceptual analysis. And I'm just going to go through the steps that we took, so you'll know, and then I'll talk a little bit about the results of each step, and you'll get a sense of where we're coming from here. So the first thing we needed to do was we wanted to pick an appropriate area of Orleans to study. To, say, okay, if we use cluster systems for this area, what would happen? And if we did centralized treatment for that area, what would happen? So we picked, what we called hybrid 2, the dark purple area that you saw on Sia's maps. So then the second thing we wanted to do is we wanted to say, well, are there existing satellite systems in that area that could be used? So we reviewed all the systems in that area. We got the records from the Health Department, Board of Health. There's all systems report. They send reports to the Board of Health. They give us a 16-page spreadsheet that we summarized. So we looked at that. And then we prepared a conceptual cluster system design. It's sort of, I'll call it a paper study design. I mean, you'll see a picture of it. It hasn't been field verified. Some of the sites might have to be moved around a little bit. Then we estimated the cluster system capital and O&M costs. We estimated the equivalent centralized system capital and O&M costs. And then we compared the two. We looked at capital O&M present worth. And then we looked at advantages and disadvantages, sort of to make sure that we picked up some of the non-cost related benefits. And then we'll touch base on implementation and what I call probability of success. And then I think we'll do some questions and discussions. So here's the area that we picked. That area generates approximately 100,000 gallons per day. It's pretty close to the dark purple area that we're showing as priority 1 for the highly developed downtown area. So task 2, we wanted to review the existing systems in this area, treatment systems in the area, to see if there was any that we could use. So, and I apologize, this doesn't show up very well, but this is a summary that I did of all the treatment systems in Orleans. 39 individual treatment systems, not septic systems alone. These are systems that have a physical treatment plant that goes with them. So there's 39 of them. The grayed areas are the ones that are in the downtown area, and I'll show them to you on a map. And the reason why I highlighted the yellow is that's the Community of Jesus facility treatment plant. That's the only plant that comes close to our total nitrogen target. So let's see. So here's the map of the purple area, and you can see the seven treatment systems. So here's Stop and Shop up here, according to the town Board of Health records. Their average total nitrogen is 38. Not good. There's the Hayes property, which has some type of treatment system. Their total nitrogen report is 73. These folks are making nitrogen. Here's the Community of Jesus. They're at 5.5. They have a good system. They do. There's Mahoney here. He's got a little treatment system. He's at 27. There's Cape Cod 5-cent savings bank. They're at 63. Log right here, he's at 23. Edgewater's at 28. And this plaza right here is the Hearth and Kettle. That's a little bit misleading. Hearth and Kettle, they have their own system, which is probably the 18. And then Shaw's, it looks like they just built a brand new system, which is probably doing a lot better. One of the guys in the office had some data on that.
Do any of these sites determine what the nitrogen load is in the influent? So, so that we know how much reduction we're actually talking about? If we're looking at a 63 in the effluent, I kind of wonder, what are we putting in there?
Right, that's right. I don't, the Board of Health records didn't really have anything on influent that I could see, and I just basically picked off, I wanted to see what the plants are doing for total nitrogen.
I don't want to interrupt you,
Sure,
but
go ahead.
I think the DEP is using 26, or SMAS used 26 milligrams a liter for influent. You look at these numbers and you wonder, how could that possibly be true?
Right.
And I had asked, I think, Stantec early on, many meetings ago, to find out what the influent was at the Chatham sewage treatment plant. Did anybody do that?
No, not that, I didn't do it anyway.
I mean,
So-
this is a big issue.
So this is one of the things that happens. When solids when you do biological treatment and you collect the solids from your biological treatment, you let it sit in the tankage and it breaks down. That organic material, as it breaks down, can give off nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen and phosphorus is included in that material. At a conventional treatment plant, solids are removed, they are thickened, dewatered, and they're taken off-site. If the solids are allowed to sit in the system too long, those solids will break down and they'll give off nitrogen.
This is a big issue, because if we're assuming the influent is 26 when we calculate how much nitrogen we have to remove, and actually it's much higher than that, I mean, this is an issue. You're using 26.
These are cluster systems.
Correct.
Not single-family systems.
Correct.
So if you look at the watershed as a whole, they're saying 26.25 applied to the residential and to the flow from the commercial.
I think it's an issue that should be looked into to find out really what we have to remove and how much water we have to treat. I'll leave it at there.
Right.
I don't want to, this is not time to
Sure.
pursue.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, when we look at nitrogen for the raw wastewater coming into the plant, we're looking at something in the range of 35 to 45, 50 total nitrogen. It's in different forms, but that's generally what we see. That's influent coming in.
Yeah, I just want to make the comment that when you look at these numbers for effluent nitrogen, there's a lot of variation in them.
Yes.
And the Community of Jesus does a good job. One of the reasons they do a good job is that it's well-maintained and operated.
Yes.
And that's a big differentiator in this. It's not only, it's the plant design, it's how you run it, how you maintain it. So you can have a not-so-great plant, well-maintained and well-operated, that does very good. You can put a lot of money into a plant and not maintain it or operate it properly and do very poorly.
Now, you should also know that this morning, before this meeting, we went and visited the treatment system at Wise Living. And their facility is designed, you can tell it's designed to remove nitrogen, and that does in the range of 7, 8, 9 milligrams per liter total nitrogen. So you're right. Depends on how it's designed, it's dependent on how it's operated. And some of these plants might be old. I have no idea how old they are. They may not have been designed for nitrogen removal. Right.
With the hearth and kettle, you're saying that that is based solely on the old hearth and kettle's treatment system and doesn't reflect the new one for the entire Skavic Corners?
I believe that's the case, yes. I drove through there today, and I saw the old system right at Hearth and Kettle, and I saw the brand-new system out behind.
And is that the same thing for Orleans Housing Authority?
Yes,
Because-
exactly,
Because
yes.
that doesn't reflect the fact that that also now has
Right.
a combined groundwater discharge permit plant that is constantly.
Correct, yeah, right. Yep, no, you're 100% correct. I think I might have put asterisks next to that, but we basically just took whatever data the Board of Health could give us, and we had talked to Brian about that.
Just to add about Hearth and Kettle and Shaw's.
Yep,
The
right.
septage pumping records of the town of Orleans show that something on that site, which is 7 West Road, I believe, is pumped every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks. Over the last 5 years.
It's an expensive proposition. Might as well have porta toilets. Anyway, so we did look at this. Our basic findings, basically the 39 total private on-site treatment systems, and that's information reported, to us from the Board of Health. Of the 39, none really meet our target of 5 milligrams per liter or less. I mean, Community of Jesus comes close. Of the 39 systems, we found 9 that discharge total nitrogen greater than 30, which basically means they're doing no nitrogen removal. They might be converting ammonia nitrogen to nitrate nitrogen, but total nitrogen is total nitrogen. 7 of the 39 plants are in the downtown area that we found, and actually there are 301 properties in the downtown area. They're not on this list because they don't have treatment systems. They have septic systems, or they have, some form of conventional Title V system. And, you know, there really doesn't appear to be any existing systems, you know, that we really, in the dark purple area, that we really could just use and say, okay, this could be a satellite treatment system for us. So we moved on to task 3, prepare a conceptual cluster system layout for that area. And this is what it ended up looking like. We broke it up into what we would call 10 cluster systems, where all the properties around the treatment plant would be connected to the one treatment plant. Now, could it be 15? Could we combine some of these, and could it be 8? You know, it depends. We would have to do a little more analysis of the actual sites. We'd have to talk to some of the owners and find out if they would be amenable to, you know, a treatment system on their property. But this seemed like a pretty good breakdown to us from a paper perspective. So there's 10 separate systems. They'll treat, they'll handle approximately 300 individual parcels, and the average flow is 96,000 gallons per day for the whole area.
Could it be 2?
I didn't see any property that was big enough for 2.
How much do you need property?
You know, I'm not really sure. I didn't really look at it, but I'd say you need something in the 3 to 4 acre range.
If there are 2 for a 50,000 gallon per day system, you need 3 or 4 acres?
Well, 2 to 3 acres. I mean, we're talking about Orleans, the Orleans size.
Well, I thought we talked about Mashpee Commons, something that was multiple of that size.
Yep.
That was there for expansion for bigger.
Right.
And that was only 2 or 3 acres, so I'm a little confused on that.
Well, you just asked me for something off the top of my head. It's the infiltration basins that take a lot of space. You know, for full disclosure, basically what we're showing you is average daily flow. Any plant that you designed has to be designed for peak flow. You need infiltration basin capacity for peak flow.
Right.
So,
I think, in answer to your question, Dave, it doesn't scale linearly in terms of flow and size of property. I mean, there's a certain baseline size that you need to accommodate tankage, building, infiltration, and it will scale up a little bit based on, you know, perhaps, you know, an increase in flow, but it's not a direct comparison or a direct relationship.
plus, I guess, to be honest with you, I was looking at it from a cluster perspective. You know, two treatment plants wouldn't, you know, doesn't really strike me as being a cluster concept.
Well, but they are defined as a cluster.
They could be.
Well, Mashpee Commons was a cluster.
Yes, privately owned, yeah.
So would it be the intention of these 10, of this plan for it to be maintained, operated by the town, each of these plants?
No, that's not, no, when I did this, my estimate, and we haven't got to the O&M part yet, but what I estimated was that each of these facilities would be privately run by a contract operations firm, similar to all the other treatment systems, all the other 39 treatment systems in town. That could be a refinement that could be done, but if you wanted to do that, you'd have to build a facility for your staff to work out of. But no, we estimated it as if there were individual systems, they would be contracted out for operations, you know.
Well, the effluent standards that you quoted for the existing systems,
Yes.
to my way of thinking, these were built to comply with the regulation, and then they put to bed and everybody closes their eyes and nobody checks on anything, and it's horrible.
Right.
The effluent standards are horrible here.
True, that's true. Now,
And it's a complete waste of money.
we'll get into the cost phase. The only thing I would say is these systems most likely would have a groundwater discharge permit. They would have to do a monthly report. Brian would see these reports, and they would be cited for noncompliance if they want to.
So I just want to be clear what we're doing here.
Correct, yes, right.
The goal of this was, there was a request coming out of the last meeting and leading up to the last meeting, that the team take a serious look at cluster systems and what it would mean to put cluster systems as the collection system of choice for the downtown area where collection was being proposed, right? That there was a request to take a real look at this. What would it look like if we did cluster systems? What would be the benefits or the costs, right? And they took literally, I think, the understanding of the size of cluster systems, therefore there's 10. Could you make them each one bigger and make it 5? You know, maybe. The point is, what are we looking at here, right? We're looking at, this is sort of a version of a cluster solution for downtown. So they were asking, are there existing stuff we can tap into? The answer was no, right, from their analysis so far. Now this is their analysis of, okay, if we were to try to solve this problem using 10 cluster systems, what might it look like? This is what they tried to do.
Right.
Okay.
That's exactly.
So,
Okay, so then,
No, one comment.
Sure.
I want to say this without being a wise guy, if I can. I think your question, Dave, is right on. And I think we've had that discussion in different venues. We started out, and I said something between 7 and 14. Very preliminarily, Stantec came back with a map that had 10 stars. 12, okay. Steve's now showing 10. The question is, could it be 7? I asked the question, you got sites 2 and 3 there, very close to each other, why not combine those? Stantec said, good idea. We look at that, we look at combining them, because there's economies of scale. If you got one operating contract, maybe you do a master operating contract for all 10, or all 9. That's another option. The fact is, there are economies of scale. If you combine those, great. If you can take these 3 here and combine them into another one, great. You take these 4 here and combine them, great. You're down to 3. Economies of scale. If you can combine all the ones on the south, you're down to 2. If you can get them all, you're down to 1. Okay? If you get down to 1, wow, you already have a site. You already have a main street with a pipe going down to one site that you could build a new plant on to handle all of these with one operating contract, one site, one disposal area, one force main out of it. So I'm not saying that's the right solution. I'm just saying we're trying to say that cluster systems, as defined as cluster systems all over town, probably not the right way to go. Well, and I don't want to preclude what Steve's saying, but what we're saying that the more economies of scale you can get, the more you can use existing sites, the more you can get that site out of someone's backyard, the better.
right. And I promised Stacy that I would take an honest, unbiased look at this, and that's what I tried to do here, so.
When you answer the question about how much space do you need, you said 3 or 4 acres.
2 or 3 acres for a.
But you're including disposal in that.
What's that?
You're including disposal in that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But you could put a plant in downtown and you can dispose of the effluent someplace else. You don't need that space in downtown.
You could absolutely do that, yes. Yep.
You didn't look at that alternative. So it's all disposed of in downtown
Because
also.
that's really the central treatment plant alternative. It's a central site in downtown versus tri-town, and why would you do that?
Well, I'm not saying,
Same thing,
I'm not
really.
suggesting you would. I'm
Right.
just saying that you don't have to include with these cluster plants. If you picked sites and build the cluster plants without the disposal, then you need a lot less property.
Correct. Right, but you need a disposal location. And you'll have to-
Certainly you do.
And you would have to pump the flow to that disposal.
Certainly you would.
You'd have 10 pump stations and 10 treatment plants all pumping to, so. But you're right, though. You're right. There's a lot of permeabilities, combinations that, that can be done.
So I'm wondering for time, if you can try to quickly move through the next.
Okay. So I just wanted to explain how I costed this up. You might have seen this graph before. This is the graph from the study that was done for the Barnstable County Wastewater Cost Task Force. I wanted to use this because I didn't want to basically have people say they're all, you made up the numbers and they're all high, so I used this graph. It's been updated. You can see the black line that's been updated from 2009, 2010 to 2014, 15. So that's the construction cost line that I used, and then they had an O&M cost line, which I also used. So here's a summary of the 10 plants. The design flow, the construction cost that came off that table, the O&M cost, dollars per year that came off the table, and the sum of the two. Then what I did was I did a cost estimate for the centralized treatment system. And what I did was I used information from a number of the prior reports that had been done that looked at sewering of that area. They had done some very detailed work. So you can see the wastewater treatment cost, treatment plant cost, approximately $11 million. We added $6.5 million because now the new process, the new plan, is to treat at a central location and pump to other locations for disposal. And so that was our estimate of what that extra cost would be. And then I added in approximately $11 million for the collection system and got a total construction cost, approximately $28 million. And then we estimated the O&M cost for the plant at approximately $1.145 per year.
I thought you said earlier, a few minutes ago, that you didn't plan for off-site disposal in this thing.
Yeah, but in the central plant,
This is comparing the central and the cluster.
In the cluster. The cluster one includes disposal on site.
On the individual sites, right. But the central...
The central plan, which is what's in the hybrid,
yes,
includes off-site.
collection, treatment at Tri-Town, and then off-site disposal. So all that wraps up to this table. And this table shows that for the cluster system option, we're at approximately $27 million. And for the centralized, we're at about $28 million. So centralized is a little bit more. Now, don't forget, this is treatment and collection, so it's all the piping that you would have to do to collect all the individual lots. So from a total capital cost, centralized is a little bit more expensive. So then we estimated the O&M costs, and that's where the big difference is. You have 10 individual plants that you're running. Cluster system estimated out at about $4 million per year, and the centralized, well, actually, no, we want to add these two. There's the treatment and the collection system. So centralized came out to be about $4.5 million, and the centralized came out to be about $1.1 million.
If you look at the centralized system,
yes,
about 30% of the cost, plus or minus, is related to electrical energy, chemicals and reagents, getting rid of the residual septage after it's treated, right?
Yep.
Is that fair? So out of $1.145 million,
yep,
about $750,000 would be devoted essentially to labor.
Right.
Correct? Now, the same $300,000 for reagents, electricity, and self-maintenance and so forth would apply in the other 10 plants. Now, wait a minute. No. The chemicals is the same because you're treating the same amount of water. And the electrical energy should be similar because you're treating the same amount of water. And the maintenance is usually a percent of the capital cost. So the point is that there's a basic cost of $300,000 or $400,000 that's common to both 10 plants and one plant. So where is the other $3+ million for the cluster systems. It's got to be all in labor.
Well-
If you put these all 10 under one contractor and use common use of labor, it would never be like that. So this is a very distorted view.
So I anticipated this question, right? Because, you know, so all I can say is that basically, I use that graph. And that's a graph that's based on real treatment plants that were done. I mean, I understand the logic that you're
Okay,
trying to apply.
But we're talking about 10 plants in Orleans.
Correct.
And you might let it out under one contractor. And you, yeah, well, money's important here. We're trying to minimize the cost.
Right, right.
And you're giving a representation that may not represent what would happen in Orleans. That's question one.
Sure. There are economies of scale that if you decided to go with the cluster system, you could try to implement. Absolutely. You could try to do it with town staff. You could try to create a town group that had people that went to each plant. Or you could put it out to one big contract, like you suggested. Or you could keep the individual contracts to try to spread the work around to smaller companies.
I think we,
I'm not sure that the 30%, when you have a centralized treatment, when you have a centralized treatment facility, the dosing of reagents and the energy and all of that is actually, because the pumps are sized differently than if you've got 10, I don't think that's a fair
when
assumption.
you're moving the same
At all.
amount of water, whether it's in
Nope,
10
size
minutes,
of pumps
the
makes
difference
a
is,
huge
the
difference.
chemicals and everything is the, look, okay.
So
it's 10 or 15%.
So let's just, I just want to note this.
Yes.
That there's not agreement on whether the O&M costs, the scale is accurate, right? If you were to do things differently. But hang on. Let's just get to the point that even for now, let's just say, even for now, if you could find a way to get the O&M costs of the cluster system to approach the costs of a centralized plant, and there's disagreement about whether that, how close you would possibly get there. We're still talking about costs that then end up, at best, similar. We're not talking about, my understanding of when we got into this discussion about cluster systems as a solution for downtown, that a lot of the excitement about it was an idea that they were substantially less money
And that's the next step.
than a central, so you still, so you
Yes.
do still think that?
Yes.
One man's opinion.
No, wait a minute. You,
Yeah.
you want to take a break, or, because I think we got to pursue this issue.
Okay, so let's hold that.
It is the graph. I mean, I
Right,
didn't make that
so we hear
that
that
up.
there's a disagreement about how it's calculated.
I knew this was coming.
We can address that, and it's probably something we need to address offline. Right. So let's hold that as an issue, and let's see if we can just finish up what we've got now, knowing that that's, but Sims, you want to say something?
Well, part of this discussion should be, I mean, it started out with satellite systems, some of which seem to be having trouble making reasonable nitrogen reduction numbers. So part of this discussion needs to be the likelihood of achieving similar nitrogen reduction numbers.
Right.
Yes.
If you can't do it, you shouldn't do it.
In all fairness to that question, if the plants were designed properly, the satellite plants or cluster plants were designed properly, they could meet the nitrogen limit.
And operated properly.
And operated properly, yes, they could. I mean, I don't want to say that they could. Just the existing ones that are there don't.
Facts are they don't operate properly, the ones we have here. But getting to the point of operation and maintenance on a small treatment plant such as the Community of Jesus, the analytical work that is required and the chemical testing of the effluents that are required, it's not just, well, if it's 10 plants, you have 100 hours of testing and so on, versus in one plant you have 100 hours. It's not the same. It's a lot more time and energy and money required for the individual plants because there truly is an economy of scale. The same thing is true of the amount of reagent required to create a particular test of an effluent at a small plant versus at a central plant.
So I want to hold this discussion because we have a disagreement But one person disagrees, and I don't want us to, as a group, try to resolve that right this second. So let's just hold that not everybody is on board with that. Yeah.
I'd just like to add, if I may, that since there is some doubt here, I think it would be helpful for us to see an itemization on coming up with those O&M costs for those cluster systems.
So-
There was a substantiation that, yes, it really is gonna cost this much money, because for me, even looking at one figure, it's kinda hard, it's a big figure, it's kinda hard.
So we'll figure out how to resolve this difference in opinion.
Right.
But can we just move on in the meantime?
Right, right. All I want to say, though, is, see this graph here? That's based on the cost of actual treatment plants on the Cape. I didn't make that, I didn't really make that up. You know, someone went and they...
We'll come back to
Okay,
it.
got it. Okay. So, we'll go through the conclusions. Okay. So, in looking at the analysis that we did, the capital costs were similar, within the realm of the estimating approach. Cluster systems have more capital cost variability, in my opinion, / uncertainty. And what I mean by that is, when you go and you try to develop 10 individual sites, will all the sites be suitable? I don't really know. Will negotiations with the landowners and the legal fees and the legal jargon going along with that, will that be successful? I don't really know. What would be the land easement cost? When you go to a private property owner and you tell him you want to build a treatment plant on his property, what's he going to say? How much money are you going to offer him? I don't really know. And then surface restoration requirements. Every property you go to, you're going to have to put the subsurface disposal system underneath the parking lot. You're going to have to rip the parking lot up. You have to rebuild it. What do the landowner want? Granite curbing, so there's some uncertainty. That's all I'm saying. There's cost variability and uncertainty associated with trying to do 10 individual cluster systems. Utilizing components of one or more existing cluster systems that there could save some capital. We could try to look at some of the plants and see if they could be upgraded, if they could add a process to it that would bring the nitrogen levels down. But on the same token, you could utilize components of the existing Tri-Town facility as part of a central facility, and that could possibly save some money too. So, the O&M analysis, O&M costs for cluster systems are significantly higher than centralized systems. I don't think there's any way to change that. The primary reason is basically economy of scale. You have 1 to 10, right? You have facility inspections, daily inspections. You can inspect 10 plants versus 1. You have compliance testing and monthly reports. You've got to do 10 plants versus 1. Performance testing and process adjustments. You have to adjust 10 different processes versus 1. A plant has to have an emergency generator that has to be tested. You test 1 generator versus you test 10. And then there's, you have a separate electric bill for all 10, a separate propane bill for all 10. If you have 1 facility, you have a much larger bill. You can negotiate a better rate, maybe through something that the town has going. And then you have facility and equipment maintenance for 10 plants versus 1 plant. So to me, it makes sense that the O&M costs are higher. Maybe it's been overestimated. There may be ways to reduce it by centralizing it. And then utilizing a central facility for staff with admin, bathrooms, locker rooms, maintenance facilities, is very cost-effective at a central plant, as opposed to having people in trucks driving out to individual plants and trying to work out of the back of their truck or the back of their car. This to compare clusters versus centralized, capital O&M present worth. I'm going to try to go through these items. So from a present worth analysis, on a 20-year present worth basis, the way we estimated cluster systems are almost double the cost. 118 million versus 51 million. The cost difference is primarily due to the higher yearly O&M costs. you know, a couple of things is, an important point that I guess I wanted to mention while we're talking about this, is that, you know, Mass DEP has, they assist with capital costs, right? They have a 0% interest loan program over a 20-year period. Right now, there's possibilities of loan forgiveness. So when you do capital, you get some help. The town, when it comes to O&M costs, that's completely funded by the users, completely. So just, I'm not making a conclusion, but just give that a little bit of thought. So I graphed the different costs, and you can see that's the present worth. The green is the cluster systems. They both started about the same capital. And the blue line is the centralized facility over 20 years, so that's the 20-year present worth, about $50 million. And here are the cluster systems with the higher O&M cost at over $100 million present worth after 20 years. So I just wanted to go through some advantages. So the advantages to a cluster system, you do save some capital for piping and pumping to the central facility, right? You don't need that force main and you don't need that central pump station. You could come up with a system where the direct capital O&M cost responsibility goes directly to the generator/source of the wastewater with a cluster system. Maybe, I put maybe there because it depends on how the town would set up a user rate system. They would potentially have less disturbance to existing roadways because now you're not building that long force main. Maybe you're not building as much piping infrastructure in the roads. And, I mean, let's face it, in Orleans, there is experience, you know, with cluster systems. So that, you know, that's, I guess that's an advantage. It's something that, you know, a lot of the landowners are used to. So that could be a possible advantage. Fortunately, we're going to go through the disadvantage list. It's a little bit long. Similar capital, but higher O&M cost. You lose the economy of scale. You have in-watershed disposal with the cluster system design. And that basically means that your sewering footprint would have to be larger. That is not in the cost estimate, right? Because you're discharging wastewater in the watershed at 5 milligrams per liter, as opposed to pulling it all out, treating it someplace, and discharging it to someplace else. So, you have more wastewater sites, and there's the uncertainty related to that. It requires more complex professional management program for proper operation and maintenance. Odor control and noise control at these individual plants. It can be done, obviously, but it's critical because, trust me, you don't want to be fielding odor complaints. There's not much worse than that. The needs for solid removal at each cluster plant. Each plant is going to have a pumper truck that's going to have to go there. They're going to have to pump out the excess material, solids, and bring it someplace. So that means in your downtown area, during periods of time, you're going to have tanker trucks that are going to be pumping out your cluster systems. And the question is, where does this liquid go? And how much will it cost? With a true cluster system design, there's no septage handling. You can't put septage into little cluster systems. They're more sensitive to flow variations. They're more sensitive to slug flows. You don't get that dilution of a larger amount of flow. And they're a little more expensive or a little more difficult to retrofit if down the road you get a new limit from DEP. So advantages of central system. Lower overall present worth, but the capital could be a little bit higher. You have out-of-watershed disposal. We talked about that. That's certainly an advantage if you're trying to keep your sewering footprint to a minimum. It would utilize the one existing Tri-Town treatment site. There's really no uncertainty associated with that. The town owns the site. It currently has a discharge permit. It's currently used for wastewater disposal. That's big. It has excellent access to the highway to facilitate septic deliveries, sludge trucking. When you do water the sludge, you have to truck it off. You're right there by the highway. You're not driving through downtown. It would provide a central facility for admin staff, offices, billing. You could have a lab facility. You'd have equipment storage. Maintenance functions could all be done right there. Odor control and noise control would be provided. Don't get me wrong, you would still have to do it. But, wouldn't be quite as critical because it's in a commercial area, it's a larger space. You don't have residences right on top of each other. And a central plant would have the ability to take in septage and would have solids handling facilities. It would allow you to maximize your septage revenue. We talked about that, I guess, last week. Larger plants are less sensitive to flow variations. They're less sensitive to slug loads. And they're a little bit easier to retrofit if you get new limits in the future, because you have, related to Tri-Town, you have a larger area. You would have, if you needed to add a new process, you would have the ability to do that. There are some disadvantages. There's capital costs required for piping and pumping to a central facility. You'd have that force main. There would be some additional disruption to, inconvenience to the citizens because of the work that would have to be done in existing roadways to build the infrastructure. There is the continued use of Tri-Town site, versus repurposing the site for some other use. I guess that's a disadvantage. So, the last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is implementation / probability of success. In my professional opinion, obtaining land or ability for 10 new cluster sites in downtown, in that dense area, is going to be difficult, and in my mind, it's going to have a very low probability of success once you get into the weeds with some of the property owners. And I'd be happy to talk to anyone about that. Utilizing Tri-Town, it's an existing facility, it's an existing site that's being used for wastewater treatment. It's in a good area. If the town decides to use that site, it's got a very high probability of success. I don't see how that would be stopped. So from a certainty, uncertainty standpoint, probability of success standpoint, centralized treatment process, has it all over trying to do 10 cluster systems. And I guess, with the absence of a driver, basically compelling a downtown landowner to agree to a cluster system in his backyard, that's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. If you think of maybe the community of Jesus, right, when they wanted to expand or they were violating their permit, they had a driver. You either go out of business or you build a treatment plant on your property. Right? So if you're a downtown property owner and the town comes to you and says, look, we want to reduce the amount of nitrogen. I know you have a system that works fine and your parking lot is great, but we want to come in and we want to rip everything up and we want to build a treatment plant on your back property and we need easements and we'll do our best to make sure there's no odors and there's no noise. And when you start, it's going to be difficult to get property owners to agree to that. And then you're connecting other buildings to that. And what if that property owner says, well, what if property owner C here dumps gasoline down the sewer and it goes to the treatment plant, contaminates my property, now what do I do? It's, absence of a driver is really tough to make a 10 cluster system work.
So, just for time, can you maybe just put these up, because I think you're reiterating.
Okay.
There's nothing new on this one, and I want to just take this moment to take a break.
Yep.
And then we can come back and have further conversation.
Right.
Or during the break, chat a little and find out how we want to proceed, because we are
Right.
behind on our agenda, which is okay. But let's take our 15 minutes now, and then we'll come back together and we will, over the break, we'll figure out how we're going to proceed.